Hello, my name's Katie and I'm a Water Resources Extension Agent for Clemson Extension. That means that I get to teach people all about water, and today I'd like to talk to you about watersheds.
This is a model of a watershed. A watershed is an area of land where all water drains to the same place. On this model, if it rains, where do you think all of the water will go? It'll drain to this big blue area. What does that area represent? It could represent a big lake or even the ocean if you live at the coast. In most communities, water will drain to small streams, ponds, lakes, and even the ocean. Does this model kind of look like the community where you live? A community is a group of living things that share something in common. In this case, our community shares natural resources like air and water. Does your community have roads and cars? How about houses and dogs? What about farms and streams and ditches? This model has a lot in common with the community where I live. I bet it looks a lot like your community too. Let's think of this model as our own community. What kinds of things do you like to do at the lake, river, or ocean? I love to swim and fish and go kayaking. What else do we use water for? I use water to drink, to cook, to shower, and brush my teeth. We use water for all kinds of things. We can't live without it. So this is an important part of our community. Each of us needs water to survive, and each of us has an impact on water quality. Water quality is a measure of how clean or dirty our water is. Let's take a look around our community. We're on the lookout for pollution. Do you know what pollution means? Pollution is anything introduced to the natural environment that is bad for the health of plants, animals, and other living things that live there. Do you see any possible sources of pollution in our community? Let's take a look at this neighborhood. What kinds of pollution do you think we might see here? How do we keep these lawns so green? We might apply fertilizer. It's fine to use fertilizer in our gardens or lawns, but we want to make sure we don't use too much. What problems come from using too much fertilizer? Extra fertilizer that isn't used up by the plants in our yard often ends up in our waterways like streams, lakes, or even the ocean. Too much fertilizer in our waterways leads to too much algae. Algae uses all that fertilizer to grow really fast, but eventually it dies and decomposes or breaks down. When algae decomposes, it uses up a lot of oxygen in the water. If there's no oxygen left, fish and other animals that breathe underwater can't survive. So too much fertilizer can lead to too much algae and dead fish. How can we make sure we don't use too much fertilizer? We can get our soils tested by Clemson Extension so we know exactly how much fertilizer we need. We can also follow the instructions on the fertilizer bag, and we can compost our fruit and vegetable scraps so that we can use compost in our garden and we won't need as much fertilizer. What other pollution sources do we see in this neighborhood? Do you have a dog at home, or do you know somebody who has a dog? What do dogs do when they go outside that would be considered pollution? They poop! And poop is full of bacteria or germs which might make other animals or humans sick. How can we keep bacteria from dog poop out of our water? We can pick it up and throw it away. We can use a bag just like a glove over our hand to protect us. Then the whole thing goes into the trash, which is much better than it going into our streams and other waterways. Where else do you think we might see poop as a pollution source in this watershed? How about over here at the farm? Do these cows and horses poop? They do. Do you think the farmer can go out and pick up every piece of poop like we can with dogs? Probably not, but they can use fences to make sure that livestock like cows and horses are kept away from ponds, streams, and rivers. What other pollution do you think we might see on a farm? We might see some excess fertilizer. What about the tractor plowing a field? Do you think we might see some pollution from this? If it isn't taken care of properly, we might see some pollutants like motor oil leaking from a tractor. Where else do you think oil pollution might come from? Cars might leak oil too. We can prevent this by taking good care of our vehicles and getting any leaks repaired quickly. We might also see a different kind of oil pollution in our neighborhoods. Some people might pour their cooking grease outside where it may hurt wildlife, or down their sink where it can clog drains and cause pipes to burst and leak sewage. And sewage means bacteria or germs which might end up in our waterway. Let's go back to our tractor, which is on the farm plowing this field. What do you think might happen if you plow a field and have all of this soil with no plants on a windy or rainy day? The soil might get picked up and moved by wind or water. This is called erosion. Moving a little soil might not seem like a big problem, but what happens if it makes its way to our ponds, rivers, or ocean? The water will become cloudy with sediment, or particles like soil that float in the water and eventually settle out to the bottom. This can become a problem for plants that live underwater and can't get enough sunlight to live. It might also clog gills of animals that live in the water, like fish. It can even change the temperature of the water. If our rivers and ponds fill up with sediment, where will all of the water go? We will probably see more flooding on the land after big rains, because the river or pond isn't deep enough to hold all of the extra water. If we plant a buffer or an area of plants along our shorelines, it can help to keep some pollution like nutrients and sediments out of our waterways. We'll use this sponge to represent a buffer of plants between our farm and the pond. Let's take another look at the cars on our road which have leaked oil. What other pollution might come from cars? This pollution might come out of car windows. I'm thinking of litter. I see litter when I drive down the road all the time. I bet you've seen it too. It doesn't look very pretty, does it? And even worse, wildlife might get tangled up in litter or mistake it for food and eat it. Litter can also clog ditches and pipes that are meant to drain water off of our roads. It's a huge problem. How can we reduce litter? Just don't throw trash on the ground. That's a pretty simple one. I'm sure you don't litter, right? And we can clean up litter we see even if it's not ours. We just have to be careful and make sure we wear proper protection when we clean up litter. We can wear gloves to keep our hands clean, and we can wear safety vests if we're picking up litter near roads. Look at all of these different sources of pollution we talked about. Was all of this pollution caused by one person? No. We all add little bits of pollution to the environment that might not seem like a big deal, but when we add all of those little bits of pollution together, we have a big problem. This is called non-point source pollution. You can't point to one person or place and say that they have caused all of the pollution problems. With non-point source pollution, pollution comes from a lot of different sources. So each one of us has to make an effort to reduce pollution wherever we can and keep our waterways healthy. There's another type of pollution called point source pollution. What if this factory was dumping oil into the river? Can we tell exactly where the pollution is coming from? Yes, and that means the factory can get into trouble and be made to stop polluting. Non-point source pollution is harder to control. Take a look at our watershed. There's non-point source pollution everywhere. Would it be hard to track down every single person in our watershed and make them stop polluting? It would be impossible. So instead, we try to educate all of the people that live in our watershed so they know the effects of their actions and will hopefully choose to pollute less. Right now, all of our non-point source pollution is on land, and our lake still looks pretty good, right? What might change that? What do you think will happen when it rains? Uh-oh, I think I hear a storm coming. Help me make storm noises. Rub your hands together to sound like rain. And stomp your feet to sound like thunder. Or clap your hands to sound like lightning. Uh-oh, it's starting to rain. What's happening to our pollution? It's getting picked up by the rain and moving to streams and into our lake. Look at our poor lake. Would you want to use this lake for swimming, fishing, or boating? Would you want to get your drinking water from this lake? No way! That's exactly why it's so important to reduce pollution on land before it ends up in our waterways. Let's check out our buffer of plants. It didn't stop all of the pollution, but it did help hold back some pollution from our farm. Thank you so much for learning about watersheds and pollution with me today. I hope you learned a lot and will help me teach other people how to prevent pollution in our watershed.